Lord.
Hello, you are watching the DMZ America podcast for Thursday, May 20, whatever the hell it is, 28th, 2026. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming to you from the left, or, where a left would be if one existed, editorial cartoonist Ted Rall.
And again, if an actual right actually existed, I would actually be right, coming to you from the right. I'm editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis. If there was actual editorial cartooning, a lot of actuals in this introduction.
There are, yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. We Ted and I were just discussing recently where editorial cartooning is these days, and it's not a good place, I'm afraid.
No, it's in a very here's the thing. It's dead. It's not dying. It's dead. And that's proven by the fact that, something, that you always say, you give a speech when on the rare occasion you're invited to give a speech somewhere. It used to be very commonplace.
Yeah.
And young people, in other words, under 65 are there, and they say, editorial cartoonists, cartoons, these are very interesting. I even like some of these. Where might I see this format? It's easier to find kabuki theater being performed in a small town in the Midwest than it is to find an editorial cartoon in your newspaper. And so, the fact that you can't find it, it's dead. By definition, it's dead.
Yeah, I can't argue. I mean, I'm still drawing for the Chicago Tribune, so I still produce cartoons, but they don't get the reactions they used to, certainly. And and when we do, like as Ted said, when we do give those rare instances where we speak, the audience is always 65 and older. Mm-hmm. And because they're the ones who grew up with it. I mean, I can't blame younger people because they're just not exposed to it. They don't see it.
Right.
Newspaper editors have worked diligently to destroy the profession for many, many years, and they finally got it. Of course, they destroyed their own profession as well, but
Yes. Thanks, Captain Ahab.
Yeah, it's so weird that they never recognized the things that people genuinely enjoyed about their newspaper. And I've said this before, and I'm sure I'll say it again, but editors it's the only business I've ever known where the people who produced the product actively loathed the people who consumed their product.
Yeah, I know. That might sound like an exaggeration, but it's not. I remember, sitting in, I can't tell you how many meetings. You've been in a million times more of these meetings than I have, but I've been in a lot where, basically it's like, well, I get this. I think it's important. We all get it. In other words, us editors, but the readers, they're dumb as shit. They're not going to understand this. That's where you can't run it. And I often found that the opposite was true, that the readers were, if anything, more intelligent than the editors. Look, you're talking about someone anyone who subscribed to a newspaper was interested in being informed. And just by definition, they're going to be a little more curious and open-minded than someone who doesn't. So why would you not respect that clientele?
I can't tell you, because they got so many calls and letters from people who were not smart about the newspaper. So they just assumed everybody was that who read the newspaper. They really
were terrified of letters.
Oh my God, Ted. I mean, I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this on this podcast, but I was on a panel many years ago and in New Orleans with Burke Breathed, who did Bloom County, when Bloom County was still being published, and with Stephan Pastis, who did Pearls Before Swine. And we were at the features editors conference. And we mentioned that, one of the editors mentioned, how can I avoid getting phone calls? And the three of us were aghast.
You shouldn't want to avoid getting phone calls.
No, we both all looked at each other and said, this is a good thing. That means you've engaged your readers in a way that they responded in an emotional, engaged way. And the look on their faces, Ted, was sheer scorn. Every person in that room, every feature editor looked at us like these upstart jerk cartoonists and their fancy haircuts. How dare they? 'Cause, I have things to do. Well, your thing to do is to engage the public and hopefully do things that they care about. That was one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. And the three of us, like I said, Burke and Stefan and I, afterwards were just like, what the hell was that? That was just a genuinely, and this was the beginning of the internet.
Management mentality. They just wanted to keep their heads down. Sort of like a certain type of civil servant who, goes into, working for whatever government department with the view of like, I'm not trying to change anything here. I'm just want to get, my 35 years or 40 years in so I can retire, and I'm going to keep my head down and avoid layoffs, avoid any kind of controversy, avoid getting fired, pissing anyone off. And then I'm going to fade slow, retire to Florida and retire into the sunset. And look, don't get me wrong. It's an unsafe world out there. I totally understand that urge to play it safe. But when you're the editor or a gatekeeper of a cultural institution like a newspaper or a magazine, you are going to die if you do it. If you don't take any chances and try to move forward. Yeah, and they did. Scott, so you saw the
this is fascinating. I can't wait.
It's a good segue because what was the main role of at the heyday of print newspapers, which I would argue is probably the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s.
Fair. 80, into the 80s, yeah.
And but we're basically, not only were they making a lot of money, and which is important under capitalism, but they had tremendous political and cultural influence,
yes.
Right? And so, so what did a newspaper, and I would say, mainstream like television news do? They basically codified a set of facts or things that we all agreed were facts. Like we are at war in Vietnam. There are, Saigon is the capital of Vietnam. Vietnam is on the other side of the planet. Like these are all things that we could kind of we all agreed to, and then like we could argue about, like then that sort of set the stage for politics, right? Like what is politics? Politics is where people in a society argue about what things are problems, which of those problems are important enough to be dealt with as a high priority, and what possible solutions should those high priority problems be addressed by, what solutions are most affordable, most practical, most effective. That's what politics is, right? But starting with, I hate to say this because I know you revered him, President Ronald Reagan, I would argue, and of course he's not alone in all this, but I think Ronald Reagan changed two big things about the United States. Well, others, but I mean, one was the idea that the American people have a right to expect anything in return for their taxes. Like basically, you pay taxes, but the government doesn't owe you any help if you lose your job or if you get sick, you want to send your kid to college or anything like that. The government, we just collect your taxes and we spend them on wars, and that's it, basically. And then the other thing and this is really the subject here, is that we have alternate facts, alternative realities, things that we all agreed were true before, but what we would do about them, we could argue about. Now we no longer agree that they're true. Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, very different men, different parties, different politics, different eras. They all agreed that climate change was real, global warming was real. Ronald Reagan came in and said, nah, it's not even a problem. It's not a problem. So if it's not even real, so if you believe it's real, then you're no longer arguing about what to do about it, or whether it should be prioritized over, say, job creation, you're now in the business of trying to convince people that it's real. And if you don't think it's real, you don't even want to have the discussion because you don't think it's real. And so, like, there, we were making a little bit of headway in the 70s, and now we're not, because as a society, whatever argument we have about climate change, as an example, is about whether or not it's real. Not whether, this is not a problem we have that a lot of other countries have. Other countries generally agree on what's real, and then they argue about those things, about what to do about them, if anything. Maybe the argument is you shouldn't do anything about it. Maybe climate change is not important enough to do anything about. And, maybe jobs are more important. Maybe, maybe those two things are irreconcilable. But we can't get to that point because we're having, we can't agree on what's real. And now, all these years later, we have the embodiment of that. Like, people can watch, like Glenn Greenwald, the podcaster, he recently posted, the results of a forum that he did between left and right, where he said what was astonishing was not that MAGA supporters supported President Trump, but that people could watch, you could follow the internet, watch Fox News, watch Fox, all sorts of right-wing podcasters, and not even know that Donald Trump is accused of any kind of financial improprieties. That, like, they don't even know that that's even, like, forget whether they're legitimate or not, forget about whether he's guilty, or whether, if he is guilty, how serious it is, and what if anything should be done about it. Like, no, they don't even know that they exist.
Right.
Okay? And so and there's a lot of things like that. Now, this right now, I've been like on my lefty bandwagon, but you can turn this over and do this exactly the other way in Democrat world, where in Democrat world, it was possible to watch MSNBC, now MS Now, for years and never get the sense that a lot of people were worried about Joe Biden's cognition, or that a lot of people or that a lot of people in flyover country weren't terribly happy about living in the Rust Belt.
Or that being called deplorables and genuinely being perceived to be deplorable.
And that, like, the people on the East Coast liberal elites hate you and look down on you.
Well, let me ask you a quick question, Ted. Here, first of all, we could talk about Ronald Reagan and what that started or didn't start. But an issue that you've talked about in your columns and your cartoons and on this podcast and other podcasts is the man problem. The idea that, you're a white male, hence you're the enemy. Hence you are the bane of everything that is wrong in the world is because you're a white male. Mm-hmm. And try to have this discussion with a heavily left-leaning person, and you will get absolutely nowhere. They will not concede that there's a boy problem. They don't see it. They can't perceive it. And they just think that you're just saying that, or I'm just saying it because I'm a white male. But I think the practical politics has shown that that's exactly what's happened. And unless you mentioned, if Kamala Harris had a major speech, if she had actually shown up more than once every 10 days to work, and mentioned and had a serious speech about the boy problem in the country, and there is a significant boy problem here, and we have to address it in a serious way. You and I can concede it. You and I see it, and we're coming from two very different directions, but we can see where,
it's quantifiable.
Yes.
60 to 65% of all American college students are women. Given the fact that college degree holders make more money than non, you can see how that's a financial advantage to those women, and good for them. But what about the guys? That's incredibly lopsided. Men commit suicide at much higher rates. They succumb to drug addiction and alcoholism and depression at much higher rates. Boys are underperforming on standardized tests and in high school and in college. Basically, boys are checked out. Men are checked out. They're wallowing in video games and drugs, and they're not engaging in society. And like the thing is, when you bring this up, as I did recently to a friend of mine, and what you hear is like, oh, let me play the world's tiniest violin for the men. And basically it's like, look, you guys had your run and you had patriarchy for thousands of years, and now it's our turn to have 1,000 years of matriarchy at your expense. Okay, well, you can do that, and I guess that's what they're trying to do. But all you're doing is replacing one form of injustice that you deplored with another one. And all you're going to do is breed more resentments that's going to lead to another male backlash in the future that will involve, that's going to lead to, what's that dystopian, you're going to lead to a Handmaid's Tale scenario where women are suppressed again. I mean, you don't want that. What you want is justice. You want not revenge. Revenge
really quality
are not the same.
Try having this conversation. I tried having it with a liberal colleague of ours recently, and I was summarily dismissed. But look at what's happening. We just mentioned the newspaper industry, and a lot of older male workers in those industries have been laid off or bought out. And let me play the smallest violin, and they hire people of color, women to fill those positions, much younger, to fill those positions. You think, well, that seems like justice, until you realize that these bastards, these corporations that own the newspapers, did it, fired guys who looked like me. Exactly. Fired guys who look like me to hire people who look like them at a fraction of what they were paying me. This wasn't altruistic. This wasn't them moving the needle. This wasn't them trying to make the society better. This is them trying to make more money. I worked for the Birmingham News for many, many years, and that was part of the Newhouse newspaper chain. The guy who headed up that chain for years passed away recently. In his obituary, Ted, do you know how much he was worth? He laid off everybody. Here in Alabama, there is no print newspapers in Huntsville, Birmingham, or Mobile. You know how much he died with? $24 billion. Now, he couldn't part with, 2% of that to actually maintain news services and, keep qualified, good journalists employed. No. So, but coming back to the point we were trying to make, try to have that discussion with a lefty friend and you get the exact reaction you just described with the world's smallest violin and all that bullshittery. That is so aggravating. You can't right a wrong with another wrong. I don't think any, and this is where this podcast, I think in the discussion Ted and I have had for decades now, comes to the fore. And that is, we can both concede, from his perspective, from my perspective, women were subjugated. Women, the Me Too movement was absolutely correct in its initial, I don't know what you call it, walkout or whatever. When its initial
diagnosis of the problem, right? In America, we often get the diagnosis right, but we don't get the treatment right.
Well, it's sort of like Marx, I can say, as someone who believes in Hayek and all the other Austrian school laissez-faire economists, but I can look at Marx and say he was an excellent diagnostician in terms of predicting what was going to happen with labor, cost of labor, and how the Industrial Revolution was going to impact that. It's freaking brilliant. His response, Ted will disagree, is stupid, but regardless,
we can have that argument another time. Yeah,
but we can. But the thing is, we can't argue that AI is a real threat. I mean, how many stories are you seeing today? AI is not a threat to employment. Horseshit. Of course it is. And you talked about Joe Biden. Joe Biden was senile. No, he's not. He's sharp as a tack behind closed doors.
Right. That's the thing, though. It's actually really brilliant. It's very Orwellian.
Yes.
If you can control the facts, right? Like if you can control reality, if you can change history, including current history being made right now, if you can change that reality, then it's sort of like the Terminator. Like if the head of the resistance never existed, then there's no resistance to deal with.
Well, there's like the Justice Department now is expunging records of their investigations into the the riot at the Capitol. in 2021, or 2020 rather. 2020, yeah,
2020,
2020.
2021.
Yes, January.
January 6th.
Yeah, January 6th. So they're doing exactly what Winston did in 1984. They're expunging the record.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing, right? So I mean, I guess the role of the news is really huge in this, because when you have look, you and I are old. When we were kids, there were three main news networks plus PBS. That's where most Americans got their news. Those same companies had owned national radio news networks. There were a few others like Westinghouse and whatever, but everybody got their news from these sources that, by the way, for the most part, all kind of agreed with each other. I mean, when you watched the NBC Nightly News with John Chancellor, you weren't really living in a different world than when you watched the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. They were, or Peter Jennings on ABC. All three of those worlds were basically, why did you watch one over the other? Mainly it was a question of style and presentation, but the content they agreed on the facts. They didn't live in a different world. And a lot of what the facts, we went through a period where what the facts were a question of coverage. Like, well, if we're Democratic media, we don't cover the Benghazi scandal. We just don't do that. And if we're Fox News, we don't cover, bad things that Donald Trump is accused of. But back then that didn't happen, and we then went through that period of basically censorship by omission, and now we're in a period of outright lies where day after day, what is plainly true is denied, and what is plainly untrue is promoted. Where, for example, we are told that, and this is true in matters of war and peace a lot. For example, I mean, I guess one big omission is wherever you stand on the war with Iran, it's worth mentioning that Israel has over 100 nuclear weapons. They're not a party to they're not supposed to have them. They're not registered. They're illegal basically under international law, but they have them, and they've had them for a long time. And I guess you could say, and it's funny, I don't know why Iran doesn't bring this up. It says, listen, they have them. Why can't we have them? We promise not to use them. They don't even promise not to use them. It's like they could. It's like, but we don't even have that discussion. It's a world of alternative facts. Or, people on the right who support Israel will say, well, there's been no genocide. No one's died over there. I mean, it's fine. And it's like, but you can, I could make the argument for why killing the people, I wouldn't make it, but I could know how to make the argument for the people in Israel killing, out tens of thousands of people in Gaza. That's okay. But they're not even making that argument. They're making the argument like it literally didn't happen. So there's nothing to talk about. Nothing to see here.
Well, and that comes down to the core.
I don't know how a society can go anywhere. Okay. Left, right, or forward. I don't know how. If we're literally if you're like, Ted, I'm really upset about this thing that happened to me, but Scott, that didn't happen to you.
Yeah. No, this comes to the core of what the question you texted to me this morning about what the gist of the show is going to be today. And I love this. It says, can a democracy survive if there are no agreed upon facts?
Mm-hmm.
And it can't. It just can't function, because as Ted said, I was stabbed in the face by a screwdriver by a left-wing lunatic. No, you weren't. Left-wing lunatics would never do that.
Right.
Well, but I have the screwdriver sticking out of my face.
Has never been invented, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it can get, and it's not, as Ted mentioned earlier, it's not exclusive. I mean, I know both sides hate hearing this, but it's true. Both sides friggin' do it now.
Mhm.
If you want an example, you want the most glaring example, let's talk about the Russia interference in the 2016 election, which didn't actually happen.
Made up.
It's totally made up, but we still have colleagues who push that narrative, and it's not true. Do I want it to be true? Yes, I'm a never Trump Republican. I would love for that to have been the case. It wasn't the case.
Mhm.
So I can go forward and go, but there are other things to dislike this guy about. There are other things about this administration I can despise. There's a long list. But if you're a Republican, a MAGA guy, you can't say anything bad about this administration, and you will spout the lies that Fox News spews. I used to. I know you did too, Ted. I watched everything. I watched Fox just to kind of find that middle ground. That doesn't exist anymore. It's like two different realities. And I don't think a democracy can survive. We've talked about, is this the end of America? Is this the end of the American experiment? Given what we're postulating here, there's only one answer. We can lie about it. No, America's better than it's ever been, Ted. And Ted can say, America, it doesn't exist. It hasn't existed for years.
What America? we are now we are living on native Iroquois land.
Now, how do we, and so really ratcheting it back to a very practical question, how in the world do we cartoon about a world like this? Because I'm cartooning. There's no moderates out there. There's no centrists out there, Ted. No one's listening. I mean, when I do a national cartoon, no one's listening to me. Your brand of liberalism, if I will, of progressivism, is very different than I'd say most Democrats, traditional Democrats. They're not listening to you. I mean,
no one's listening to us, and nobody's listening to people like us in professions that are still viable, like, let's say, podcasting or or radio or television. I mean, the thing is, the fantasy, right, for anybody who has an opinion that they really strongly believe in and they think it's important, they feel like they can defend, is that you're going to be able to make your case to the American people, and you're going to be able to change a lot of minds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like the wet dream for someone like us is like to wake up one morning and be like, it turns out, man, Scott Stantis, he was right like 3 years ago when he said that thing. And like, everybody's like, oh, fuck yeah, I had to change my mind. I'm now going to vote differently. I'm going to think differently. I'm going to dress differently. I'm completely changing my shit. And like, that's the fantasy, right? And obviously that's not likely to happen in most people's lives, right? Or it won't happen very often. But we do have to slowly be able to change our minds. I mean, think about like when we were kids, people smoked everywhere. You could smoke in a hospital, in a grocery store, where people ate, on buses, in airplanes. And like now, basically, you can't even smoke in many cases in your own home. You are literally, if you live in an apartment building in many cities, you're not allowed to smoke with the windows closed. So that's a huge transformation. Whether you like it or not, I do like it. But
me too.
But the point is, that was a society that over the course of 40, 50 years radically changed its mind about something. Now, I have to think that if we reset the clock to 1960, big tobacco, they would triple down on denial. They'd say, no, you don't understand. Like, smoking's actually good for you. If you don't smoke, you could die. If you will live for 1,000 years if you smoke, and like they would just like keep going, because that would be the right move, right? Because you could propagandizing a problem out of existence is the solution now. There was a time where the Surgeon General would issue a report, everyone would be like, okay, this is the deal, and we all agree. And now the question is, how much do we care and what do we do about it? But we don't now. That doesn't matter. I mean, literally, for example, 2 days ago, we talked about this on one of my other shows with Robbie. It's like the city of New Orleans. It's official. it's going to be completely underwater within a matter of a few decades. It's going to be gone. The city of New Orleans needs to be evacuated, and that's it. Now, it sucks. Yeah, we're gonna, I don't need to get into why it sucks. It sucks, obviously. But we got to get started. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's start moving people, right? And helping them move. But we live in a society where most people are going to, in the back of their minds, people who live in New Orleans are going to kind of live in denial and think, well, maybe it's not true. We'll just ignore that. So you can't even address, they're not even going to have a conversation about it because nothing feels real and there's no discussion to have. And if you did have a discussion, it would feel pointless. And you're certainly not going to get to a point where, there's a blue ribbon panel of top government officials who are trying to figure out what to do. It's just the story comes out, we talk about it, it's ignored, and 40 years from now, everyone in New Orleans dies, and we're like, how'd that happen? I mean, that's it.
Well, to your point, again, in the last few days, RFK's health department came out and saying that vaping is A-OK all of a sudden. This is on the heels of big tobacco, which has moved into vaping in a big way, gave gobs and gobs and gobs of money to the GOP. I can attest that if you've ever been to a political convention, I can't vouch for them in the last 3 cycles because I haven't been. Prior to that, there was a great big party. Everybody had these amazing parties. And when I was covering the 96 convention, which nominated Bob Dole, U.S. Tobacco had a yacht, a massive yacht party. It was great. They had bowls of cigarettes, bowls of cigars. It was fantastic if you happen to like cigars, which I do from time to time. But you could tell they were giving, this one party was a multi-million-dollar party. And so they had to have been giving gobs of money to the GOP. My point being, RFK is kowtowing to the big tobacco interest, and all of a sudden saying vaping is A-OK. Now, full disclosure, Ted, I don't think you know this about me. When I got to Chicago, high stress and so on, I started smoking again. It was really stupid. Not proud of it. To begin to quit smoking is I started vaping and lowering the tobacco level in the juice that you vape. But even then, I could tell you, sucking stuff into your lungs is not healthy. I don't think I need a doctor to tell me this, but the fact that now the Health and Human Services Department of the United States government is saying that vaping is just Jake, it's way healthier, just go ahead and do it, is idiotic. And it's driven purely by monetary concerns of a political party. How do you have democracy? How do we have... Let me back up too and just throw this out there, because people say, well, when did a cartoon ever change people's minds? And I can tell you that Jeff McNally and Pat Oliphant's attacks on Jimmy Carter were in large part what happened during the course of his term, the perception of him as kind of a bumbler, decent, well-meaning kind of guy, but just a terrible president. And that perception was codified by the cartoonists in the country. And it had a major effect. Editorial cartooning in and of itself, I've never done a cartoon, just one cartoon that changed somebody's mind. But I wanted to ask Ted, after I make this point, this question, because Don Wright changed my mind on the death penalty. I was all for it. And he did 2 cartoons that were in his collection, a very strong anti-death penalty cartoons, and they changed my mind. Have you ever drawn anything like that, Ted? Or have you ever had a cartoon, like, let's say a handful of cartoons by a creator that went, well, shit, they actually have a point?
No, I've had that with, I've read, I'd have to, sort of scour my, my mind about other cartoons I've read, but I've certainly had my mind opened and changed by reading cartoons by other people. And I've gotten letters, emails from people who said that I changed their minds about issues. particularly during like the war on terror and that stuff.
Has terror surrendered yet? I can't remember how that ended.
Coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's when it began in earnest, is when you had shit like that, a war on terror.
Well,
okay.
I mean, now, at that point, you're like full into the lies, right? I mean, okay, so for example, and there's the garden variety political lie, which is we know that Iraq has WMDs. That's not a new kind of lie. I mean, that's an old kind of lie, right? That's just politicians. They're trying to convince the American people to do something that they want to do, so they tell them what they want to hear. But what was interesting to me was after the WMDs were not found, a new talking point appeared on the right. We did find the WMDs. They did find them. And like that is currently the talking point. Like if you were on X, formerly Twitter, and you were to bring up the WMDs in a serious way, you would get a lot of people on the right would say, well, they did find the WMDs.
Yeah, we have a colleague who's a conservative cartoonist who has stated this in his cartoons. What did they find?
They never found the WMDs, right? Because there were none. And like the thing is, people who really had a lot at stake here have admitted that, like Colin Powell. So I mean, but that's a fucking amazing thing, where like people will post things on every single day on Twitter. People will say like, oh, like yesterday I saw some prominent right winger posted, Teddy Roosevelt banned Islam. We can do it too.
No, he didn't.
No president ever has done anything like that.
It's unconstitutional.
It's totally unconstitutional. So like the point is that, but they say it with total like, not like, well, I kind of, I heard that. No, it's total certainty, right? So a lot of people will read this, follow this person, believe them, trust them, and it's in their mind like, oh, well, we banned Islam once. It's like, it's not true. And the thing is, so that's where we are. We're literally, you're making things up. You're a liar. And here's the thing. There's like, if you're Laura Loomer or someone like that, there's no punishment at all.
No.
For that. Right? Like you will not lose your job. You will not be deplatformed. Nothing will happen. You won't there's no, like, I've always said there should be like a Google review, like for people who like you should be able, like an online, like let's say you post on Twitter and you're caught lying. That should be held against you. Maybe you shouldn't be censored. I agree with that. But like you should be, it should be like, Ted Rall has a 3.2 rating out of 5.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great if it was just like, Scott Stantis has a 2.7% out of 5 of truthfulness.
Right. I mean,
you probably look at that and go, well, I need to work on that, I guess. How are they? Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, honestly, it's like, hey, if a restaurant is constantly getting closed down by the health department, I kind of want to know. And like, and if Tom, or like even like predictions if they're wrong, right? Like Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, yes, he has many top prizes and earns a lot of money. He's usually wrong about most things, as it turns out.
So just to add to our thesis that democracy in the United States is over, you can't have democracy if we can't agree on something as simple as facts. Now, because the process, as Ted said, hey, there's a bunch of poor people. Okay, we can admit there's poor people. How can we help those poor people? Well, Ted's solution would be different than my solution, but that's where the debate would be. There may be parts of Ted that, okay, we can do part of that, but he can do part of mine. And that's how things move forward. But if I can say, Ted, there are no poor people in the United States. That's just not true.
Conversation I recently got into on Twitter. Where
seriously?
Someone literally said 2 days ago, no socialist country, every country that has tried socialism is a failure. So I responded, every country that's tried capitalism is a failure. And what I meant by that is it's a failure if there's poverty. Poverty should not exist in any modern society. And it's like, and then people that came back, and lots of people on the right said, there's no poverty in the United States, or if there's poverty in the United States, it's because it's people who choose not to work because they're lazy. I'm like, well, that's empirically untrue. There are a lot of hardworking people who are desperately
Yeah,
poor.
the working poor is, which are the people we should be helping the most because they're trying to do what they're told to.
But the point is,
we don't.
That's not true. And like people just, so like that's, I mean, here's the thing. We both agree that like democracy cannot function, right? Like, I mean, I'm not even saying like function in like a good direction. It can't function in any direction.
Right.
It can't function if we can't agree on what's true. So I guess the question is it possible to undo that? Is it possible to move forward and like figure out a way to restore some kind of truth as a metric, some kind of source for truth?
Is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. Is it likely? Not at all. Because how many people, I mean, Ted, we got to tie things up because I know you have things you got to run off to do, but real quick, how many people have you talked to who state a fact because they want it to be true? And when you can empirically say that in a great, one of my favorite Rawlisms of all time, it's not only untrue, it can't be true.
Which I stole from my lawyer, but yes.
Oh, really? I love it. Well, don't.
He said it in court. Yeah.
Oh, it's a brilliant line. And that's the world we live in today, is that it's true because I want it to be true. It's real because I feel that it's true. And that's the left and the right.
Or more like, and a lot of these people, they know it's not true. They don't even care if it's true. They just want you to think that it's true. They're just bullshitting you. They're literally just lying to manipulate you. That's all it is.
On that note, Ted, have a good rest of your week.
Which we do get. Are we going to now be graced by the sweet tenor of the?
I think I have one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Away we go.
It's always tease, tease, tease. You're happy when I'm on my knees. One day is fine, the next is black. So if you want me off your back, do I stay or do I go now?
Oh, should I stay or should I go?